Hello, and thank you for watching this video. My name is Alessandra Saviotti, and I'm currently speaking from Amsterdam, where I live in the Netherlands. And I am a curator and educator and PhD fellow at the Liverpool John Moores University. As a long-term collaborator of the Associación de Arte Útil, I'm very happy today because we'll get to ask some questions to Juan Sandoval, who is an artist and a co-founder of El Puente Lab, a platform for cultural and artistic production active in Medellin, Colombia, and he is also the director of the art office of Città dell'Arte Fondazione Pistoletto in Biella, in Italy.
Hi, my name is Gemma Medina. I am an art historian speaking from Eindhoven in the south of the Netherlands. And I work as well as curator and educator. And together with Alessandra, we are coordinators and archivists of the Asociación of Arte Útil. Today, we are going to talk about El Nodo de Desarrollo Cultural 1, El Morro, an alternative space designed collectively to host cultural activities and community initiatives in El Morro, a former municipal dump in Moravia, a neighborhood in Medellin. This project brought together an international team formed by the El Puente Lab that include Staff Unlimited, a group of architects, artists, community activists, and students of architecture in Medellin. So thanks, Juan, for accepting the invitation to share with us some insights of this project. And let's start. First, I would like to ask you to introduce us about what is El Puente Lab and how did you start with the idea of El Nodo de Desarrollo Cultural, or in English, Nodes of Cultural Development in Moravia.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, for having me for this conversation. It's very, interesting for me to go back to one of the, I believe, one of the most important projects we have developed with the El Puente Lab in this more than, let's say, 50 years, even a little bit more of work we have been doing in Medellin. Well, I think it's important first to contextualize the work of the collective in the city, in Medellin, because of course, I am sure you have heard about the social and urban transformation of Medellin. Medellin was a very complicated and violent city during the 80s and the 90s. So our activities, let's say, just were somehow responding to a really important moment of transformation of the city. Since the year 2000, more or less, the city started throughout the work of a new mayor who was Sergio Fajardo and other architects and other people who were engaged in trying to understand how to resolve the social problems of the city. They tried to do investing in cultural infrastructure in the most poorer areas of the city. So there was a whole movement of, reborn of a city, of, trying to find new and alternative ways of making a city, less violent, more fair, more livable, and so on. So our activities respond to that moment of transformation. So we wanted somehow, as artists, to do something. No, at that time I was doing my residency program in the year 2000. As well in Biella. I arrived here where I live to be in Biella as an artist in residence. And then talking about Medellin with other fellow artists who were in residency and so on, we say, okay, how interesting it will be to be able as artists to do something, to start something, to show or to change the view of foreign people about the city, and to bring this creativity process to the city. So it worked as, it started, the idea of a collective started from the residency program, not only by myself, but also in conversation with other people. So in 2003, we organized this with a colleague of mine called Natalia Restrepo, who is a professor in Medellin. We said, okay, let's do a first try of a workshop, inviting foreign artists and local students, to do something, to create this idea of platform of encounter. So the idea of El Puente, it's a very kind of even naive name, but at the time we say, okay, it's like really connecting two places. We have a place, we have Medellin, things happening there, students wanting to do things, to know more, and we have on the other side, and we have the rest of the world. So how to connect these things? So what our idea was, okay, let's connect, and to connect we used the idea of bridge. So in 2003 we did that workshop, and that was very interesting to put together, international artists and people thinking about, more broad picture of the world, maybe people who was also used to travel in Europe and other places, with, students in Medellin who were at around, 20, 22, never went out of the city, or maybe just a little bit out in the country. So to put these two ways of understanding culture together and working together, that was like our first starting point. And then, of course, after that, we make some exhibitions and conversations. We try to do some, artist project in the city until 2008, more or less, where, of course, some people went out and some of us just, staying, wanted to do more. But I think that the actual change in the idea of the collective was when the director of the cultural center in Moravia, which is the neighborhood where the project we are speaking today is based, an artist and a historian, Carlos Uribe, who knew us, who knew about what we were trying to do, said, okay, why you don't propose a project for the neighborhood, for Moravia? Moravia was one of the key points of that urban transformation of Medellin, because its situation is a neighborhood that grew on and around the former dump, as you just mentioned before. Very complicated neighborhood, very poor. A whole generation of young men just disappear during the 80s, because some of them were involved in being sicarios, and some of them just being killed, disappear. So a very, very complicated situation. It was one of the main focus of transformation for the city administration. We have to change that. We can't have people living on a dump. So this has to be transformed. So there was a very important investment on the transformation of that area, and part of it was the creation of a cultural center. The interesting part of the cultural center was that the activities of the vision of the cultural center were somehow shared with the community. So what kind of cultural center do you want to have? And the community said, well, we want a cultural center. Of course, this is a very long process that I'm now making very short, of course. But the community said, we want something dealing with music. We want something, a place where, so the main focus of the cultural center is music, but they do many other things. So have this director, Carlos, and Carlos engaged us. You say, why you don't propose, you are thinking about bridge, bringing people from outside, why you don't use this moment of transformation of the neighborhood as a place to work, as a very specific place to develop projects. And that's how we really started doing projects involving artists in the transformation of the city. So I think it's important to say that in all the projects we did in Moravia, there was a strong collaboration with the cultural center. This is something very important. It wasn't us as a collective in a direct contact with the community, but there was an institution that was trying to root their activities in the community. So we were involved in this process of the institution negotiating and working with the community. So that's more or less to reassume the history of El Puente Lab. Now we are 2 people. So it's me here in Italy and my colleague Alejandro Vázquez in Medellin. We configure Corporación Cultural, which is like legal status to be able, of course, to receive money, do projects, and so on. And something important is, since the very beginning, we decided not to have a space. So we thought that the space will be something that will force us to do, to spend a lot of energy on maintaining a space, while our idea was more to do projects. So we say, the important thing for us is the project. So the infrastructure, the space, or the hosting space for residency, we can find these things in the city, collaborating with other people who is making already residence. We collaborate with a residency space which is called Casa Tres Patios. So when we have artists that needed residency, we collaborate with them. When we needed a studio for an artist, so we find another place to have a studio. So we decided since the very beginning to not be attached to a physical space, but more to think about, to invest all our work and our energy in making the projects possible, and the projects in relation to the urban space, urban transformation, and the communities, of course, that inhabit those spaces. And well, in this almost 17 years now, we have invited then artists to go and to work with us, and the idea is that we create like such a kind of framework or frame project where the artists then are invited to work with us. So that's very, very, I hope, short but clear resume of why we are doing that and this, and why, and the importance that we are based in a city like Medellin. I think that shaped our mind, the idea of coming from that specific context.
And thinking about the conventions or the canon of the arts, how do you see the authorship of the project if we think about El Nodo de Desarrollo Cultural?
Well, of course, it's a collective project. We know each one of us have a part of the authorship, I will say. Of course, the work of the guest artists, that, as you mentioned them before, Stealth, it was very important because they brought, and that's why the idea of making a bridge, El Puente, is important, because you bring into a specific context someone who has a completely different view of reality, of doing things, in this case of architecture. So they brought a methodology. So they invented with us a methodology to respond to the invitation. So we create that what I mentioned before, this framework of collaboration, and then people who we could collaborate with, and of course we were the ones negotiating with the cultural center, and we were the ones engaging the community, but we offer all of this to Stealth, and then they were responding, and they put a very important but they react with a very interesting methodology. So I think it's a co-authorship, but of course each one has a role in this co-authorship. Also the two architects, Yesenia and Camila, who really were involved in the building of the Nodo, because Stealth Unlimited, they went with us. They went to Medellin for I don't remember, it was 3 weeks maybe, in which they set up with us the methodology, but then they left. So we keep the method, and we developed then the physical result of that methodology. So it's I will say it's a co-authorship between us, between of course the guest artists, with the local architects, with the local the students that also took part and helped us to find materials to do research. The community that we engage in conversation, of course, the cultural center that put the first question, because that, of course, that was a very clear invitation from the side of the cultural center. They said the invitation was something like this to us, to El Puente. They say, well, listen, we are having so much people, so much public, so much activities that the space, we have the physical space, is not enough. We need a satellite space, very fast, temporary, to fulfill the needs of the community, because the people want, they need more of what we are doing. The people were excited. The people were coming from another neighborhoods to join the activities. So that was the first. They also proposed us a plot of land that during the process, when still were there, it became not possible anymore. So we were the ones solving all these problematics and this situation. I think it's very, very clearly a collective idea where each one has a part of the authorship.
And like having in mind what you just said about being really like a bridge and also operating as like a sort of extended collective, right? I was curious to. We are curious to know a little bit more about the process of negotiation between the individual and the collective interests of the participants, let's say, or like the inhabitants of the neighborhood.
Well, of course, it's different from each project. Of course, we have, because as you saw maybe in the book, we have done a project with a very specific physical result as El Nodo. So where the aim was to really find let's say, an easy and fast solution to have a new space. So the task was very, very well defined. And in other cases where ourselves who proposed the project, for example, when we did the Moravia Video Lab, which was a project of video making with teenage girls in the same neighborhood, that was our proposal to the cultural center. We say, okay, why we don't do a project where we train girls, to use video cameras, to edit their videos, and then, somehow to empower their own, identity as girls or women in that specific society. So we try to, to be very, to accept the proposal or the request from the cultural center, also to propose from our side. And I don't know very well what to say about the individual. I think it was always like a kind of collective game, where you open yourself with your ideas, knowing that there are other people who are, willing to, and who wants to collaborate, and you want them to collaborate. So maybe the idea is just to be open to that dialogue to happen with everyone, and to bring all that in, and then to be able to give the space to all of them. That's why maybe I say that is more being collective is more like this idea of being flexible enough to bring more people in, and to enable this process of dialogue and negotiation with an institution, for example, like the cultural center, or with the community, and in the case when we work in Barrio Conquistadores. So yes, I think this is this constant, it's like to be very elastic also, to respond to a specific context, but at the same time to be able to bring other people in and create a dialogue that is let people also to express and to recognize their professionality, if you can say that. Because for example, when we work with Mattia in Barrio Conquistadores, okay, we invite him to enter in this, there was a tension between the community and some urban renovation process that was taking place, and then it was Mattia's idea, understanding, and through the people we put him in contact, but it was his, then his skills and as artist and architect to respond to that situation. So it was also up to us, as me and Alejandro, as let's say the local representatives, to help him to go in the right direction also, but also letting him enough space to be the professional he is. And I think the same with the Stealth, when we did the Nodo, it was okay. We invite them to respond with us to a very clear task, but of course they were totally free to propose and to say, okay, we from our experience, you should go this direction, you should work with recycled materials, you should find recycled materials in the area. So they draw a very specific way of developing an architectural process. I don't know if this responds the question.
Yeah. You responded very well, and also I have the book right here. And I'm very happy that you mentioned already this concept of being collective, because it's something that when we read the book, we found it super interesting to really, put into words this attempt and transformation in becoming collective or being collective that you have been trying to do through your work. So then the next question, I think it would be about the consequences of El Nodo. So after 10 years, is there any political effect or transformation that you saw that was able to achieve through the project? And also, perhaps in another question that is somehow linked, we were wondering if the same methodology that you developed through El Nodo, or when you were particularly working towards El Nodo project, has been applied to other areas of the city.
Well, as I said before, El Nodo was at the beginning conceived as a temporary installation that now became, well, after 10 years, I would say, permanent for all this time. So it's still there, it's still functioning. It works as aula ecológica, which is like a ecological classroom. So it has a use still now. There's someone who is still since 10 years keeping it alive and doing activities as a place for the community. Because I ask, I'm not all the time in contact with them, so I ask what is happening now. And then also, for example, during Christmas, there is a place where they do the novena, so the people gather. It's like a place of gathering now for the community, where they do still cultural activities, and it's still linked to, of course, to the cultural center. So the main cultural center is responsible for all the activities that are happening in the Nodo, which is maybe in distances maybe 200 or 300 meters in a very dense neighborhood. So between one and the other is full of houses. And so this is really a satellite of the cultural center. So when we start first, when we realized the Nodo, and Carlos was the director of the cultural center, we said, okay, this really could be a methodology that we applied again in the neighborhood, because the neighborhood needed more spaces like that. And this could be also applied to other places in the city. So in our dreams, of course, that was a very good solution to have very cheap space where people can do activities, partly coming from recycling. So we use a bus that we recycled windows and the outside of the bus. And but we have to realize our new parts also. At the beginning we were trying to work with containers, but in a city like Medellin, which is not near to the sea, the containers are not very easy to find and they are very expensive. So we realized a new structure to be like the main part of the space. We thought it was a very good solution for having more cultural spaces. And well, I think we were lucky at that time that the city was wanting also to invest in different solutions for the neighborhood. After a while, they say they didn't want to invest more. So it was for the new director of the cultural center, it was kind of a fight to keep the Nodo going, even this one that was already realized. So of course it was not possible to do more. We thought at some point that it could be a strategy, but of course a strategy which needs investment from the city or from who is administrating the cultural life of the neighborhood, and that wasn't possible. So it remains. So that's a good thing. Something that was supposed to be temporary is still there and is still functioning, and is used by the community, and people take care of it. Well, now it's been all painted, and well, it's active. So that's a very good thing. But it wasn't possible to make this become like a more ongoing strategy for the city. So people has been interested. Many people has come and see the Nodo, and I remember people from Brazil saying, okay, this is a very good idea. We would like to do something like that. I have no idea if someone actually did. It's possible. I don't know that. I have to say that at the very beginning, when we start with the Puente in 2007, we have the first meeting in Moravia, and we invited someone also from Brazil again, because they were doing I think it was called Pontos de Cultura, something like that. I don't remember very well how they are called, but that was a very interesting program from the Brazilian government in the years around 2000, 2002, where they create these small places working on digital and open source strategies, on the making. So we have that somehow that idea in mind to create, something which is small and very flexible and where people can gather. So we have that idea in mind, even if it was totally different because they were working in actual buildings, infrastructure that was already there. So we work on the creation of a new very, very cheap and flexible infrastructure. Well, and many architects and artists has done things like this in Europe, but I think it's different because the context is very different. But yeah, well, yes, I will answer yes. It has been important because it's still there, but it wasn't possible to make it a structural transformation of the idea of making culture more accessible. Well, I knew something maybe it's interesting to mention. Of course, probably is not linked, but in the recent years, in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, there was a very important project by the city of Medellin again, transforming the old water tanks. Medellin has many of these like water reserves. I don't know how you call them in English, around the city, and with a process of very, very interesting cultural infrastructure idea. They transformed those places in cultural places. So they renewed that. They took those infrastructure that were already in the city, but they were obsolete, and they transformed it in a new space for culture. So I don't know if it has anything to do, but it would be interesting to think that somehow at some point someone in the city say, okay, we can do an infrastructure which is lighter, is more flexible, and is cheaper, and well, all of those concepts that we try to work about.
Yeah, and actually, to finalize the interview, I wanted to ask you something that is very connected to what we were mentioning, like the process, in time, and how these projects, in a way, need this kind of means of sustainability. And thinking about the past when you start, and thinking about the future, like in the past, did you thought about sustainability? Did you try to foster or ensure sustainability in some way? And thinking in the future, how do you see the project, from now on in the future?
Well, again, at the beginning it was imagined as a temporary project. So of course we didn't thought about how it will maintain, because it was supposed to be after 2 years just to be dismantled. But maybe lucky enough, as we have to change the place since the very beginning, we were about to do it in one place, but then they say, no, that place, a kindergarten will be there. You can't use that space. You have to find another space. So we moved far from the big cultural center to the other side of the neighborhood, in a very in a remaining space that was not possible to build any big infrastructure. So they gave us this like a little corner to work in. And that's why it then became permanent, because if they take the Nodo off, they can't build another thing there because it's too small, the space. So that was a an ongoing change of the original idea. So we passed from a temporary idea, and after realizing it, we understand that it will be permanent until now, 10 years after. So I will say that it has been because how important it's been for the community, and how used it's been by the community, because this is still a place that they are using, is thanks to all of this that is still there. So the administration of the area of the cultural center are still investing time to time money used to fixing the roof, fixing the door, the windows when it's needed. So keeping it in good conditions. It's been just because the community just really need those spaces, and the community is using those spaces, and of course that's so clear that I think at some point the people who has the money to keep all this infrastructure running say, well, we have to keep those spaces running. It will be, if we just let them go off and just take them off, there'll be a loss for the community. So it's good that they're still active, still alive. So, well, I think in the future they will, as far as the who administrate from the financially point of view, or the cultural center, as far as they want to continue, investing this little money year by year and keeping them in good conditions, they will be on, because the community is using them. So, the answer is no. Well, we didn't thought about sustainability. We didn't at that time when we realized them. We know. Actually, after two or no, I don't know how many, maybe 3 years, they had to do a new roofing, because the original roof was not ready to be there forever. So they have to add a new light structure as covering. I have to mention also, for example, that originally the Nodo was composed of 3 bodies, 2, let's say, container-alike structures, and 1 bus that we just cut, and was like a kind of terrace. And I think it was something like, okay, the Nodo was built in 2011, and I think, yes, already 5 years ago, they had to take away the bus, because that was an open shelter. So there were people, there were gangs hiding guns in there. There was a place for prostitution, because the 2 other spaces are closed. You can't get in during the night. But this one was, there was 1 wall off, so it was a kind of very nice terrace, and that was a big problem. So we didn't thought about that in the beginning, because we didn't thought that it would be stayed there forever. But in the time, the night community started using it in a different way that was problematic for the neighborhood. So at some point they have to just take off that part and say, okay, no, this can't stay here, because it's creating problems. And it was very attractive, it was a bus, cut in half, without the engine, without the wheelchair. It was, visually was very interesting, but it created in longer term, it created a problem. So we didn't thought about that. I have to say that.
So I think it's very nice concluding on this note, which reminds us what does it mean usership somehow. Because in this case we saw that usership brought the project to continue also beyond the expectation perhaps of the initiators of the project, but it also brought some side effect. And then it needed to be transformed and adapted to the community of usership. So I think it's quite an interesting note where to conclude the interview. But thank you very much, Juan, for your generosity in being here with us today and for telling us more aspect of the development of Nodo. And looking forward to the next 15 years.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Well, no, thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to speak about it. But of course, we can't say many things. Of course, the thing that we just said, the facing reality, of course, is something that maybe as artists we just don't foresee. But of course, the users, of course, also decide how. It's been positive and negative. It was a bit negative on what I mentioned before, but it's been so positive in how the community just say, we want this space to stay. So that's it is the important part of it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that this practice needs to deal with the reality, because that's what we are doing, right? So yeah, it has been a pleasure to have you, and hopefully we will have another interview in the future to discuss again the new transformations of the project.
Of course, that will be my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Juan.